When people hear that counter-terror police are tracking a suspect, they often imagine something simple. A name appears on a screen. A team is assigned. Surveillance begins. And eventually an arrest is made. But in reality, the process is far more complex, cautious and structured than most people realise. In the United Kingdom, counter-terror policing is built around intelligence analysis, legal thresholds, surveillance coordination and constant risk assessment. The real challenge is not simply finding someone dangerous. The challenge is determining whether that person is actually moving toward violence. Because many individuals may express extreme views, far fewer take steps toward committing an attack. So investigators must carefully distinguish between rhetoric, curiosity, grievance, and genuine operational intent. That process usually begins with a fragment of information, a report, a referral, a suspicious online post, a purchase, a travel pattern, a tip from the public, a concern raised by a school, employer, or family member. At this stage, investigators rarely have proof. They only have an indicator. Something that might mean little on its own, but could become important when combined with other information. This first phase is called assessment. Investigators ask basic but critical questions. Is this information credible? Is it connected to terrorism? Is the person expressing ideology, curiosity, anger, or actual intent? Is there any sign the risk is increasing? This stage can be difficult because the early signals of a threat are often ambiguous. Someone may be viewing extremist material online. That is concerning, but it does not automatically mean an attack is being planned. But if that same person also begins researching weapons, transport routes, targets, or attack methods, the picture begins to change. Counter-terror police are not only looking for dangerous beliefs, they are looking for movement from belief toward action. That transition is the key warning sign. Once a concern is identified, the next step is intelligence triage. Investigators compare the new information with existing records. Has this person appeared in intelligence databases before? Have they been referred previously? Do they have links to extremist groups or individuals? Have they travelled to areas of concern? Are they connected to any ongoing investigations? Sometimes a single report becomes far more significant once it is placed next to older fragments of intelligence. This cumulative picture is essential. Counter-terror investigations rarely begin with a complete story. They develop gradually as pieces of information begin to connect. If the concern grows, investigators must decide how serious the case is. This stage is prioritization. Not every suspect can receive the same level of resources. There may be many individuals of concern at any given time. Some may be expressing anger online. Others may already be researching targets or acquiring equipment. Investigators assess several factors: intent, capability, access to weapons, access to potential targets, technical knowledge, psychological stability.
There's signs that the behaviour is escalating.
A person expressing extremist ideas presents one level of concern. A person conducting reconnaissance or buying attack materials presents another. If a case crosses the threshold for active investigation, police begin building a detailed picture of the suspect. This is the case-building phase. Investigators try to understand the suspect's daily life and behaviour, where they live, who they communicate with, what devices they use, what their routines are, where they travel, what they search for online, whether they are becoming more secretive, whether they are communicating with others who encourage violence. The purpose of this phase is not simply to watch. It is to understand. Police must determine whether the suspect is fantasizing about violence or preparing to carry it out. Once the investigation develops, intelligence collection becomes more structured. Counter-terror police may use a range of lawful investigative methods: physical surveillance to track movements and meetings, digital analysis to understand online behavior, financial investigation to identify suspicious purchases, communication analysis to map contacts and networks, open source intelligence to examine online activity and public messaging. Each method helps investigators answer a critical question: what exactly is this suspect trying to do? One of the most important stages in any investigation is identifying the shift from ideology to mobilization. Many people express extreme beliefs, but the risk changes when behavior becomes operational. Investigators look for warning signs, selecting a target, researching attack techniques, conducting reconnaissance. purchasing materials, testing routes, trying to conceal activity,
Seeking help from others.
preparing statements or manifestos. These behavioral indicators often reveal intent long before an attack becomes visible to the public. Another key step is network mapping. Even when a suspect appears to be acting alone, investigators must determine whether others are involved. Who encouraged them? Who provided ideological influence?
Who shared tactical advice?
Who helped with money, transport, equipment, or digital security? Sometimes individuals appear to be lone actors but are actually connected to a wider online extremist ecosystem. Mapping these relationships helps investigators understand whether they are dealing with one suspect or a broader network. As the investigation progresses, surveillance becomes more targeted. Investigators focus on key behavioral triggers: a suspicious purchase, a meeting with a contact, a visit to a potential target, a sudden change in routine. A device being switched off unexpectedly, a journey that matches reconnaissance behavior. These signals are evaluated against the entire intelligence picture. Nothing is interpreted in isolation. At the same time, investigators must think about evidence. Stopping a threat is critical, but police must also build a case that can stand up in court. That means carefully preserving evidence, documenting surveillance, obtaining legal authorizations, and coordinating closely with prosecutors. One of the most difficult decisions in counter-terror investigations is timing. Arrest too early and the evidence may be too weak for prosecution. Wait too long and the public risk may increase. So investigators constantly balance threat disruption with evidential strength. When police believe intervention is necessary, detailed operational planning begins. Where will the arrest happen? At home? In a vehicle? In public? Will multiple locations need to be searched? Are weapons likely to be present? Could the suspect destroy evidence? Will digital devices need to be captured immediately before they lock or wipe? Every detail matters, because a suspect may only need seconds to destroy critical evidence. When the moment comes, police move quickly. The suspect may be detained under terrorism legislation. Premises are searched. Devices are seized. Documents, tools and materials are collected. Associates may also be questioned or arrested. But the investigation does not end with the arrest. In many ways, the next stage is just as important. Investigators begin analysing everything recovered. Digital forensics examine phones and computers. Financial records are analysed. Communication histories are reconstructed. Investigators try to answer the remaining questions. What exactly was the plan? How close was the suspect to carrying it out? Were there additional targets? Were other people involved? Sometimes this analysis confirms what investigators already believed. Sometimes it reveals a more advanced plot than expected. And sometimes it exposes connections to wider networks. Eventually, prosecutors decide which charges should be brought. These may include preparing acts of terrorism, supporting terrorist organizations, collecting materials useful for terrorism or other related offenses. Even after a case concludes, agencies conduct reviews. They analyze how the investigation began, which indicators were most important, whether warning signs appeared earlier, and how future investigations can improve. Because counter-terror policing is constantly evolving, threats change, methods change, online platforms change, and investigators must keep adapting. Tracking a suspect is therefore not a simple act of following someone. It is a structured process. First, a signal is detected. Then investigators test its credibility. They compare it with existing intelligence. They assess the level of risk, but they build a picture of the suspect's behavior and connections. They collect intelligence lawfully. They identify the shift from ideology to mobilization. They map networks. They monitor behavioral triggers. They prepare the legal case. They plan intervention. And when necessary, they act. The public usually only sees the final moment, the arrest, the raid. The headline, that the real work of counter-terror policing happens long before that, in surveillance logs, in intelligence analysis, in risk assessments, in quiet decisions about whether someone is still talking or is now preparing to act. And in many cases, that invisible work is what prevents attacks from happening at all.